Picture yourself walking through the marble corridors of the magnificent palace on Palatine Hill, the heart of the Roman Empire. On a hot summer evening in 65 AD, the screams echoing from between the gold-leafed walls are chilling enough to freeze your blood, because that night, Emperor Nero, the most powerful man in history, had stained his hands with the blood of his love, and this blood marked not only a tragedy, but also the beginning of one of the most disturbing psychological manipulation stories in human history. These horrific events that took place during Rome's Golden Age will show you not only the dark secrets of the ancient world, but also how unlimited power can corrupt the human soul, because what Nero did was far more complex and disturbing than killing the woman he loved. He forced a young man into a horrific transformation to keep his love alive even beyond death. After listening to this story, you'll think of Sporus's nightmare when you wake up at midnight, and feel his desperation when you close your eyes, because some historical truths are powerful enough to leave marks on our minds. If you love these hidden truths and dark historical stories, don't forget to follow our Unknown Truths channel. These unforgettable real stories that I research for you every week can reach more people, thanks to your likes and subscriptions. You can also write in the comments which unknown truths you're curious about. This strengthens our connection, and I take your ideas into consideration when choosing the next topic. Among Rome's dazzling marble columns, in 59 AD, when Emperor Nero first saw Poppaea Sabina, he felt that something in his heart had changed forever. Poppaea was not an ordinary Roman woman. She was one of those rare women who caught attention with her intelligence as much as her beauty, someone who could stand on her own feet. Her long auburn hair took on iridescent tones in the sunlight, while her green eyes sparkled with a determination that could intimidate even Rome's most powerful men. Nero was only 22 years old when he met Poppaea and was living through the 6th year of his reign. As a young man who had just emerged from the shadow of his mother, Agrippina, and was beginning to discover his own personality, Poppaea's strong character seemed like magic to him, because Poppaea, unlike other women in Nero's life, maintained a cool distance toward him. This distance attracted the emperor even more. Poppaea's attitude had deeply wounded Nero's ego, which thought he could bring all the women in the world to their knees, but at the same time fueled his desire for her. She wasn't trying to impress him. On the contrary, she knew her own worth. This was the first resistance the emperor had ever encountered in his life. On the first day she was brought to the palace on Palatine Hill, Poppaea wore a red stola embroidered with gold. Pearl necklaces adorned her neck, while her fingers carried rings filled with precious stones. But what caught attention the most was that proud posture that mesmerized everyone who looked at her. It was as if the palace's magnificence didn't affect her. On the contrary, she adorned the palace with her own presence. Nero had been enchanted by Poppaea's uniqueness. Most women would be overjoyed when faced with a palace invitation, but Poppaea showed neither fear nor excessive respect. There was genuine curiosity in her eyes, but also a self-confident attitude. That night on the balcony terrace, with Rome's lights stretching out beneath their feet, Nero tried to understand Poppaea's difference. Most people either feared him when speaking with him, or tried to impress him. But Poppaea was simply herself, and this would never change. At that moment, Nero's heart completely belonged to Poppaea, because she was the only thing he couldn't possess, a free spirit. In the months that followed, Nero's interest in Poppaea turned into obsession. He showered her with gifts like rain. Silks brought from India, gold from Egypt, perfumes from Arabia. Every morning, a new surprise was found at Poppaea's door. But Poppaea's attitude didn't change. She was still distant, still self-confident, still too independent to be possessed. Nero's love for Poppaea deepened with each passing day, but at the same time took on a darker character. For the first time in his life, the emperor was trying to touch something his power couldn't reach, a woman's heart. This situation both wounded him and inflamed him even more. Poppaea, on the other hand, was beginning to realize that Nero's passion was not healthy love, but an obsession. She knew that love was not something to be bought and sold, that it arose, spontaneously, or not at all. But Nero had difficulty understanding this truth. In 62 AD, Nero made a crazy decision. He wanted to marry Poppaea, but for this, he first needed to divorce his current wife, Octavia. This decision created great shock in Rome's political circles. Octavia was the daughter of the previous emperor Claudius, and this marriage was critical for Nero's legitimacy. But love was stronger than reason. After sending Octavia into exile, Nero held a magnificent wedding ceremony with Poppaea. The wedding was recorded as one of the most glorious ceremonies in Roman history. A crowd of 40,000 people gathered in the Forum Romanum to watch the couple. Poppaea wore a snow-white silk wedding dress that day. Her hair was braided with golden threads, and a crown made of lotus flowers sparkled on her head. As she walked toward Nero, her steps were so graceful and proud that it was as if a goddess had descended to earth. At the wedding ceremony, Nero announced that he was making Rome's most beautiful woman his wife, and that his love for her would be as endless as the power of this empire. Poppaea only smiled at that moment, but signs that something wasn't right could be seen in her eyes, because she was beginning to realize that Nero's love was actually an obsession. The first years of their marriage looked perfect from the outside. Nero protected Poppaea like a treasure. He assigned special servant women to her, decorated the most beautiful rooms, and even established a special garden for her. In this garden, rare flowers brought from all over the world were grown. But the light in Poppaea's eyes dimmed a little more each passing day, because she was no longer treated as a wife, but as a beautiful object. Nero loved her so much that she was beginning to need permission even to breathe. Every movement was controlled, every word evaluated, every glance analyzed. Poppaea, Rome's most beautiful woman, was now like a rare bird living in a golden cage. She had all luxury and comfort, but no freedom. Nero's love was slowly beginning to suffocate her. On that fateful evening in 65 AD, despite being pregnant, Poppaea was in a tense state of mind due to the pressure brought by her married life with Nero. The emperor had returned from the gladiator games late that day, and was met with Poppaea's cold reception. Poppaea had begun to question Nero's priorities. She was uncomfortable with the emperor being occupied with his own ego satisfaction instead of governing the people. Especially the hormonal changes during pregnancy had made her less tolerant. What happened that evening would be recorded as one of history's most tragic moments. The argument began with Nero's lateness, but soon evolved into the couple's deeper problems. Poppaea thought that Nero was not fulfilling his responsibilities as a husband and future father. For the first time in his life, Nero had received such harsh criticism from Poppaea. Having himself, whom he saw as a god, questioned, triggered the emperor's anger, which he was used to controlling. At that moment, rage had replaced reason, and madness had long since taken the place of logic. According to historical sources, Nero struck pregnant Poppaea's belly with such violent force in an angry movement that the young woman immediately collapsed to the floor. The pool of blood accumulating on the marble ground was enough to bring the emperor to his senses, but it was already too late. Poppaea's pale face, her body writhing in pain, and the blood flowing from her belly were enough for Nero to understand the magnitude of what he had done. He was killing the woman he trusted most, loved most, who was the meaning of his life, with his own hands. And at that moment, something broke forever in Nero's mind. He called the best physicians in the palace, offered them fortunes, threatened them with death, but none of them could save Poppaea's life. The young woman died within a few hours, along with the baby in her belly. That night, Nero had also lost the heir, who would be born in the future of the Roman Empire. After Poppaea's death, the change in Nero was horrifying. The emperor had completely disconnected from reality and began to believe that Poppaea was still alive. Instead of burning her body, according to Roman traditions, he had it mummified and placed in a more glorious tomb than those deemed worthy of previous emperors. Nero had declared Poppaea a god and established a cult for her. Every day he visited her tomb, talked to her as if she were still alive, reserved a place for her in palace protocol, and even had plates prepared for her at the dinner table. Everyone around the palace had to participate in this tragic play. These behaviors of the emperor were not just beyond a personal tragedy. They were also shaking Rome's political structure. State affairs were stalling, administration was weakening, unrest was increasing among the people. But no one dared to tell the truths to the emperor, who was in the grip of madness. It was during this period that 15-year-old Sporus entered Nero's field of vision. The young man was one of the freed slaves serving in the imperial palace and was an educated youth. However, his fate would change forever due to his physical resemblance to Papaya. Sporus's facial features, especially around the eyes and bone structure, bore a striking resemblance to dead Papaya. In Roman culture, physical resemblance was believed to be an indicator of spiritual connection. The moment Nero first saw Sporus, he saw a divine sign in this resemblance. In the emperor's broken mind, this resemblance was not a coincidence, but an opportunity given to him by fate. A chance to bring Papaya back. Of course Sporus was male, but for Nero this was just a technical obstacle to be overcome. After all, he saw himself as a god, and for gods, nothing was impossible. What Nero planned for Sporus was one of the most calculated examples of cruelty in human history. He planned not only to dress the young man as a woman, but also to transform him physically. This transformation would be irreversible, and would change Sporus's life forever. The emperor called Rome's best physicians and ordered them to surgically change Sporus's sexual organs. This operation was extremely risky and painful under the primitive medical conditions of that era. It often resulted in death from infection or blood loss. The surgery was performed in specially prepared rooms of the palace. Primitive anesthetics and simple surgical instruments were used. While Sporus's screams echoed in the palace corridors, Nero impatiently awaited the realization of his plan. The young man's recovery process lasted months. During this time, special trainers were assigned to teach him how to be a woman. Walking, sitting, hand and arm movements, voice tone, everything needed to change. Sporus's masculine identity was being systematically destroyed. Palace tailors sewed clothes suitable for Sporus's new body structure, while jewelers designed special jewelry. The fact that most of these jewels were pieces left from Papaya revealed how sick the situation was. With lessons from makeup masters, Sporus learned to soften his facial features, make his eyes appear larger, and make his lips more attractive. Every morning when he looked in the mirror, he had difficulty recognizing himself. What was reflected was no longer that childhood friend he knew. The most difficult part had been voice change training. His natural voice tone was completely changed, trying to achieve a thinner and more feminine tone. This meant not only a physical change, but also disconnecting from his own identity. When Sporus's training was completed, Nero gave him the name Sabina, which Papaya had taken after her death. Now he would be the reincarnation of the dead empress. This name change was not just a name change, but an attempt to create a completely new identity. In the spring of 67 AD, one of the strangest weddings in Roman history took place. Nero held a full imperial wedding with Sporus. The ceremony was celebrated with all the protocol and magnificence of a real imperial wedding. The palace spent great expense for the wedding ceremony. The most expensive flowers, the most valuable fabrics, the most famous musicians. Everything was to make this illusion seem real. The guests, even knowing the truth, had to act as if it were a normal wedding. Sporus wore a white silk wedding dress that day. The tiara on his head was made from Popea's old jewels. During the wedding march, his steps were so expertly trained that outsiders could see an emperor truly marrying a woman. The most painful aspect of the ceremony was how perfectly Sporus performed in this theater. Now he had completely put himself in Papaya's place, could tell past memories as if they were his own memories, and could give any reaction Nero desired. The married life that began after the wedding turned into daily torture for Sporus. Every morning he woke up in rooms decorated with Papaya's memories. Every time he looked in the mirror he saw someone he didn't recognize. And in every conversation he produced someone else's voice. Nero had begun to truly believe that he had brought Popeye back. He served Sporus Popeye's favorite foods, talked with him about past memories, acting as if there was a real past between them. This was psychological torture for Sporus. The young man was forgetting who he was, a little more each day. He played the Papaya role so well that sometimes he had difficulty remembering his real identity. This identity confusion began to deeply affect him. The Roman people were uncomfortable with their emperor's strange marriage. Everyone knew the truth, but no one could speak out. This situation had further shaken the people's trust in Nero. In 68 AD, Nero's political power completely collapsed. Rebellions had broken out all over the empire. The Senate had declared him an enemy. and even the Praetorian guards had turned their backs on him. When he was forced to flee Rome, only a few loyal people were with him. Sporus was among them. Nero's last days were spent in a small villa outside Rome. Even there he wanted Sporus to act like Poppaea. The emperor's madness continued even on his deathbed. Eventually, Nero chose to commit suicide rather than be captured. His last words before death reflected his artistic soul. But with his death, a new nightmare would begin for Sporus. After Nero's death, Sporus became a political toy. First Galba, then Otho, then Vitellius, each new emperor wanted to use him for their own ambitions. They all tried to use this legacy left by Nero for their own purposes. During this period, Sporus was completely worn out, not only physically, but also emotionally and psychologically. Each new master wanted different things from him, but none gave him back his real identity. Under Vitellius, the final humiliation planned for Sporus completely broke him. The emperor wanted to humiliate him in front of the people in the Colosseum, in a gladiator game. This was his final bearable limit. For the first time in years, Sporus found the opportunity to determine his own fate. He chose death. In 69 AD, he ended his life, probably by taking poison. This suicide was also a final act of resistance. The young man's death was not only a personal tragedy, but also a symbol of the moral collapse of the Roman Empire. His story went down in history as one of the clearest examples of the destructive effect of unlimited power on humans. The trauma Sporus experienced was not limited to physical transformation. The greatest loss was losing his own identity. He was forced to live as someone else for years, losing even the right to be called by his own name. The psychological destruction Sporus experienced before his final decision was difficult for even modern people to understand. Facing a stranger's face in the mirror every morning, being forced to remember a dead person's memories every night, not being able to hear his own voice. This was the kind of torture that would tear a person's soul apart. For years, Sporus must have harbored a small hope inside. Maybe one day this nightmare would end, maybe he could return to his real identity. But with each passing day, he was losing this hope a little more. Sporus, whose situation didn't change even after Nero's death, realized that he was no longer living for anything. In Rome's political chaos, Sporus, used as a toy by everyone, had seen that his existence was only to serve others' fantasies. This awareness created deep anger and despair in him. Vitellius's Colosseum plan was the last straw for Sporus. Now he was wanted to be humiliated, not only in private areas, but also in front of thousands of people. This was an unacceptable line for him. On that last night, probably in the silence of the palace, Sporus must have reviewed his life. He must have remembered his childhood, the days when he was free, the times when he spoke with his own voice. These memories must have shown him that death would bring freedom. The moment he took the poison, he probably experienced a relief he hadn't felt for years. Because now no one could control him, no one could tell him what to do. Death meant liberation for him. Roman historians, when talking about Sporus's death, mostly treat it as an extension of Nero's madness. But the truth is, Sporus's story is a precedent, example of human rights violations and identity destruction attempts that can happen in any era. What he experienced was not unique to ancient Rome. Throughout history, the powerful have tried to shape the weak according to their own desires. Sporus's tragedy is the extreme point of this situation. Today, in an era when identity and gender issues are handled with sensitivity, Sporus's story becomes even more meaningful. Because he is one of the first recorded people whose identity was changed without consent. From a modern psychology perspective, what Sporus experienced can be considered one of the most severe examples of severe trauma, identity fragmentation, and personality disorders. The psychological torture he endured left more permanent marks than physical pain. One of the most painful aspects of Sporus's story is that his voice was never heard. We never know what he felt, what he thought, what he wanted. We only know what was done to him and the decision he finally made. This silence is actually the clearest indicator of the power balances of that era. We must not forget that people like Sporus lived in an age when they had no say in their own lives. This dark period of the Roman Empire is a symbol not only of political instability, but also of moral collapse. Sporus's tragedy reveals the effects of this collapse on innocent people. Today, 2,000 years later, by remembering Sporus's story. We must not forget that we need to be alert against the control of the powerful over the weak. Because, in every age, there will be Neros who think they are gods, and Sporuses, who are their victims. This story teaches us very important lessons about how love turns into obsession, how power turns into oppression, and how a person's identity can be destroyed. Sporus's final decision was perhaps the only free choice he could make in his life. And this choice was his last way of protecting his human dignity. His memory should continue to inspire us to protect the rights of the powerless. Because what Sporus experienced is the kind of tragedy that should never happen again.